Agenda is back this week with everything you ever wanted to know about the government's economic strategy, last week's government conference, and how the House of Keys has fared during the last 12 months. Lots to talk about, and who better to help us understand the issues but Alistair Ramsey. It's a little while since we've caught up, Alistair, and actually, just over 12 months ago, we were rattling through discussing the forthcoming, as it was then, election. So 12 months in, how would you say the current crop in the House of Keys are faring?
I think they're working hard. There's quite a lot of energy, quite a lot of passion around this administration. They've had obviously some very unusual circumstances to deal with, emerging from COVID, and then just to go almost straight into a massive cost of living crisis caused by the war in Ukraine. So they've been sailing in some very stormy seas, but I think they're making some headway, if I could use those cliches.
It occurred to me as I was listening, and we will come on to talk about the government conference, but as I was listening to various comments about, and of course extraordinary circumstances, but we're battling through and this and that, is this not a mindset that government has got itself into, that anything out of the ordinary or unusual that comes along, really since the 200 million hit on VAT, what's that now, nearly 15 years ago, since then there has been one crisis or another to use as a convenient excuse for government perhaps not delivering on its original plans?
Yes, I'd say that was a particularly cynical take on it. Yes, that they have been almost in crisis mode, in a permanent state, haven't they? But the COVID crisis was in a different league, and the energy costs at the moment are, unprecedented. Well, certainly for a very long time. So I think there are genuine emergencies out there that they've had to deal with.
And is this, though, just the shape of the political world that we need to get familiar with? Have things changed so much in the world that the level of stability that perhaps we've been used to for a generation before is no longer there?
I think it means that you can't take things for granted anymore, but equally it opens up the opportunities for radical new approaches to old problems. And one example of that is the economic strategy, which I guess we'll be talking about.
So then in terms of the newly elected, as they were a year ago, House of Keys, are there any particular members that you think are shining at the moment? Any surprises in terms of those elected? Any people that you thought may have been duds that are impressing, or vice versa?
Well, that is a tricky question. As usual, everyone's so keen to get on with the job and be seen to be doing stuff and are taking on their responsibilities that most people get in some way or other part of the government machine. So there have been very few people who are standing on the sidelines and just asking questions. And in that respect, I think Jason Morehouse is one of those who is prepared to ask questions, hasn't got too involved in the kind of machinery of government. And some people might criticise him for that, but I do think that's a valuable role. Not necessarily throwing bricks, but just asking the kind of awkward questions, sometimes the simple questions that the ordinary person in the street might want to ask.
And of course, Jason turned down the opportunity to become part of government at an early stage in the proceedings, and apparently hasn't been asked since whether he would like to take any role on, and presumably he hasn't gone looking. So.
No, maybe he's not regarded as a team player.
Maybe. Yeah. And interestingly, of course, this week, or the week just gone, Claire Christian announced that she was stepping back from some of the busyness that she had been engaged with over the course of the previous 12 months.
That was interesting, and of course that coincided with the ministerial reshuffle. And of course there'll be speculation there that maybe she'd didn't get a ministerial role or whatever, but I don't know what the truth about that is.
Yeah, and certainly she said to Manx Radio that this was purely a personal circumstance thing. And I suppose if in the new system that we have, there's no particular financial incentive to be engaged with government in the ways that there was previously. Members get paid a flat rate, whether they choose to take on 2 or 3 departments and chairs of boards and all these other things, or whether they choose to do to have no direct government engagement.
Yes, there isn't the financial incentive to be part of the kind of government team anymore, but I think people instinctively want to kind of take on roles, they want to take on responsibilities, and I think a lot of people, perhaps most members, ultimately would want to be a minister, and if you want to be a minister you have to kind of show willing, I guess.
And it is fair to say that Council of Ministers holds the vast majority of the power, certainly in my experience. Don't you?
Yes, I think so, yeah, and they still have that gift of appointment and that gift of promotion. And people want to be promoted, they want to take responsibility, and they want to be seen to be taking responsibility.
So in terms of the performance then, both in terms of Tynwald, House of Keys and government, how do you think they've actually done over the past 12 months? Would you have expected more, or have they been reasonable in taking their time to think and plan?
I mean, every new administration comes in with a blank sheet of paper because of the nature of our politics. They don't come in with a roadmap of where they want to go. They have to work that out. So I must say I was struggling for the first year to see where they were going. I didn't get much of a clue from the island plan, to be honest with you. But then with this economic strategy, they have come forward with a very radical, very ambitious agenda for the future, which is, I think, pretty clear and also very controversial. And I was surprised at that.
Yes, and in terms of that, I mean, a lot of what's in there is political motherhood and apple pie in that every government there's ever been would want stable public finances, and it's not an unusual ambition for government to want there to be a thriving economy and to engage with the private sector and all these sorts of things. The thing that perhaps is most controversial in relation to the strategy is this very clear and very strong ambition that to achieve all the things that government has set out in the political motherhood and apple pie parts of this, they want to see a 15,000 increase in population by 2037. And that is quite a bold step.
It is. And to my knowledge, no previous government has actually set a target like that. People have talked about it, and people have talked about increasing the economically active population. But I think politicians knew that the prospect of a big increase in population will be controversial. So in the past, they've shied away from it. It was also seen as a kind of byproduct of economic success that your population might increase. But to my knowledge, this is the first time a government has set this almost as an end in itself. And I think that's brave, to put it mildly.
Yes. And I suppose the surprise to me, because I don't think I think anyone who follows the Manx politics to any reasonable extent, and anyone who's listened to Paul Crane, Paul's constant message is this imbalance between the economically active and the economically inactive part of the population. It is clear that we are having fewer and fewer people in employment to pay for a growing number of people, whether they be retired or young people still at school or nursery or wherever. And that imbalance is growing and it is unsustainable. So something has to change. It's not an unsurprising then result that government thinks actually the only way we're going to do this is by shipping a load of economically active people into the island.
Yeah, I mean, it is a real and fundamental issue, and such is the nature of our politics that, this has all come as a kind of as a bit of a surprise to, in terms of the public agenda. It's the sort of thing that should have been at the heart of the general election campaign a year ago. It's about the future of our island. How do we want it to look? What type of place do we want it to be? And yet we're having this kind of fundamental national debate a year after the election. But I guess that's due to the lack of party politics. I mean, you could almost have a political party coalescing around this. They could call themselves the Progressive Party or something. And it's a strange mixture of kind of economic expansion, but also very strong public sector elements. I mean, one of the other things that's quite radical and controversial is that they are looking at companies paying tax, more companies paying tax. Now, that used to be a no-no not long ago, but they're looking at the end of the zero rate. Quite how and when is a different matter, but they're actually that's now conceivable in a way that it wasn't before.
You're listening to political commentator Alistair Ramsey with me, Phil Gaughan. The statement the Treasury Minister makes is that we need to broaden the tax base. At the moment, it's primarily individuals paying taxation, and we need to broaden that tax base. Yeah. Of course, they do have a massive helping hand in that internationally there is a strong move to get rid of zero-rated companies. So that it's not like they're doing this as a bold initiative of the Isle of Man. This will be a combined effort of the Crown dependencies, Jersey, Guernsey and the Isle of Man. They will jump at the same time, and only if the international community is ensuring that happens.
I think the question there is, I mean, the current OECD initiative affects the larger multinationals. The question is whether the Isle of Man then chooses to run ahead of that and says this is the direction that the world debate is going. So, do we then impose taxes on just small domestic companies at some point, presumably after the current energy cost crisis has settled down? And I think there is an agenda there to say actually it is fair that, companies of all sorts pay some tax.
And undoubtedly it is. One of the, I felt anyway, surprising omissions from this whole discussion on raising government income was rates, which seems, depending on who you speak to. I did an interview with the Treasury Minister in which he strenuously denied that rates reform was off the table. It's just it wasn't a priority and was unlikely to come forward in the next few years.
Yes, it's not off the table, but nobody can see it anywhere.
So yes. If it's not off the table but it's not a priority and it's not going to happen for the next few years, it's hardly going to happen in an election year because rates reform is undoubtedly going to be an unpopular thing with a large proportion of the population.
In some areas, yeah. And I think the whole local government aspect of this radical new future has been overlooked, or deliberately as perhaps. The role of local authorities in regeneration, in kind of green policies, community developments and so on. So it's obviously politically tricky territory. So, but if they're going to be radical and bold, I think they need to take that into the mix as well, because the rating system is arguably very unfair. The current local authority structure is arguably inefficient and ineffective, and that doesn't mean the big guys take over the little guys, but it needs to be reviewed quite radically, I think.
Yes, and I think I would agree with you, despite my other employment working for a medium-sized local authority. I think, yes, there's no doubt that there is more that could be done there, but maybe it's because they recognise they're already taking fairly bold steps that may prove to be unpopular, that there's only so much that you can reasonably bite off at any one time.
Yes, you can't fight on too many fronts at one time. Perhaps.
Interestingly, on this increase of population, clearly many people on the Isle of Man are struggling to find homes. They're struggling to afford to pay for the rents or the mortgages, whatever are required. I have been pressing the Chief Minister ever since this 100,000 by new population by 2037, ever since this was announced. Okay, how many houses are going to be built on greenfield sites? And it is fair to say it is the one question that is guaranteed to get the heckles up of the political establishment at the moment. They are very, very keen to push the idea of brownfield site development. And to be fair, they seem to have some pretty good ideas and plans in place to actually start delivering where previous governments have failed in relation to brownfield development. But inevitably, there are going to be some greenfield developments there have to be to fit in all these new homes.
And it is surely the obvious question, if you're talking about population increase, how many can be accommodated within brownfield regeneration? How many, if any, would be required for greenfields? And that's the kind of further information, that's the kind of detail that's missing here. You would expect somebody to have done some estimates, at least, about capacity to answer those questions. And I think without more information like that, I don't see how Tynwald can give this a complete green light. I'm not saying, on the other hand, I don't think they should just push it into the long grass, because it's addressing and, well, it's asking some very big questions about our future. But I think it needs a lot more work about where do the people go? What does that mean for the look of our towns and countryside? I mean, if Douglas is going to be completely regenerated, some people like Douglas, as it is, sort of. Would Douglas look completely different? There was some talk at the government conference about maybe new towns or certainly new villages. What would it look like,
And I suspect that someone has done this calculation, but I suspect that they are not awfully keen on having the headline figure of 2,000 new homes on greenfield sites. I equally believe that they are very serious about getting brownfield development off the ground, and there are loads of sites, as certainly I know, because I was minister trying to get some of these developed in relatively short periods of time when I was in infrastructure. There are lots of sites which are effectively sitting in a fairly derelict condition, which could be developed. And certainly I detected from Kate Lord-Brennan's presentation about how they were going to deliver this, that they do seem to have a plan. The Manx Development Corporation being established now for about 12 months, it seems to have some pretty good ideas about how it can work to develop brownfield sites. So, it's possible that the majority of the people who are required for the bold vision could be housed within existing residential areas.
Yes, but that is the sort of information we, the public, are entitled to, I think. The other issue, of course, is this proposal, and again, a very bold, radical proposal for the Isle of Man, that you actually put quite a lot of public reserves, government reserves, public money into commercial projects and developments that would then inspire or trigger a wave of private sector. So, the government would be leading the way. That would send a message of confidence out to the markets. Well, how much? Where's the tipping point there? There must be. I know there's talk of an initial fund of 100 million. Do they think that's going to be enough? What's been the experience in similar communities elsewhere? Because it's kind of a leap of faith. It is build it and they will come, and that may have worked in other places, but it needs more information around that, more evidence, and perhaps a bit of thought about the alternatives to this vision. It's presented as a kind of the only show in town. There are no alternatives. Well, there are alternatives. They may not be palatable, but if we're going to have a proper debate, you need to look at the options.
Yes, and do you think Tynwald will present, backbench non-Comin members will present some of these options when the debate takes place?
I don't know. I mean, that's the big question is what the response to the consultation on this has been, what the kind of perceived public mood is on this, and then what the mood of the backbenchers will be. Because the Council of Ministers and the Chief Minister in particular have really nailed their colours to this mast. I mean, he has really been fronted this one up and almost made not quite his personal project, but, he's really committed to it. If Tim will kick it into touch, that really dents his status and authority, I think. So I wouldn't be surprised if they asked for more information. They just have to make sure that isn't kicking it into the long grass exercise. And
of course, the other apparently radical element, we're certainly told to believe that it is radical, is a 35% reduction in greenhouse gases, or greenhouse gas emissions, by 2030, which is 7 years' time. How radical would you say that actually is? I'm not at all an expert on this area, but I mean the message I got from the government conference, which I guess is obvious to a lot of people now, is that the old argument about the cost of sustainability has faded away now, because sustainability is actually cheaper given the world that we're living in. So I think the path to those targets will be easier now politically and in terms of the public, because we can see that actually being self-sufficient or more self-sufficient, having alternative sources of energy, just makes sense in a very unstable world. Certainly relying on gas from Russia and oil from the Middle East is becoming a less secure option than perhaps it was when similar discussions may have been being had 10, 15, 20 years ago. Yeah, some of the issues that remain are they're talking about increasing the Isle of Man's own renewables. To what extent does that include kind of onshore wind, which would be, I think, quite an issue. Maybe it's all directed at offshore wind, but I think could be quite an interesting issue. And of course, insulating homes was always seen as a very quick, easy win, and it's still seen as a quick, easy win. It's just we don't yet seem to have managed, or government doesn't yet seem to have managed to have worked out exactly how to achieve this quick, easy win. Yes. I think one of the things to come out of this debate is that it's kind of exposed that the island has fallen behind in various areas, when for years we were convincing ourselves that we were doing really well and the Isle of Man had the best public services and we were this, that and the other, which makes you wonder, well, how did that happen, despite all the grand strategies and plans in the past? Because us kind of more senior people do remember there have been lots of bold plans in the past, maybe not quite this bold, but economic strategies. I remember Terry Groves leading the Central Economic Strategy Unit decades ago, came up with a very good comprehensive plan. I would guess that 90% of that just went straight on the shelf and didn't go anywhere. So we've had all these bold strategies in the past. Very few, if any, have gone anywhere. The question is, what's different this time? Lots to think about there, and there's still time to feed back to government on the economic strategy. For now, though, I'm Phil Gorn. Goramayo. Thanks for listening.